What's the most important Neanderthal fossil ever found? That's a tough question. It's like asking for the most important sentence in a book. The answer depends on what you mean by important. Do you mean the one that started it all? The one that told us the most about their bodies? Or the one that changed our whole idea of who they were? There isn't a single winner. Different fossils were important for different reasons at different times. The story of how we understand Neanderthals is really the story of these key discoveries. Each one added a crucial piece to a puzzle that we're still putting together. Let's start at the beginning. The very beginning. The first one. Imagine a valley in Germany in 1856. The Neander Valley. Workers at a limestone quarry are clearing out a small cave, the Feldhofer Grotto. They find some bones. They assume they belong to a cave bear. They toss most of them aside. But they keep a few of the bigger ones, including a strange-looking skull cap. It's thick. It has a massive bony ridge over the eye sockets. The quarry owner gives the bones to a local teacher and amateur naturalist Johann Karl Fuhlrott. Fuhlrott knew he was looking at something unusual. This was no bear, and it didn't look quite human either. He took it to an anatomist, Hermann Schaffhausen. They presented the find together in 1857. They argued it was an ancient primitive type of human. This was a radical idea. At the time, the concept of human evolution was not widely accepted. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species wouldn't be published for another 2 years. The scientific establishment was not ready for this. A prominent pathologist, Rudolf Virchow, dismissed the bones. He said they belonged to a modern human with rickets, a disease that softens bones. He claimed the brow ridge was from the man constantly furrowing his brow in pain. The others suggested it was a lost Russian Cossack from the Napoleonic Wars, his legs bowed from a lifetime on horseback. But the idea of an ancient human wouldn't go away. The fossil, named Neanderthal 1, became the type specimen. That means it's the official example that defines the entire group. Every fossil found since that might be a Neanderthal is compared back to this one. It gave the species its name. Homo neanderthalensis, the human from the Neander Valley. So, is Neanderthal 1 the most important? You could make a very strong case. Without it, the conversation never starts. It was the first clue. It was the bone that forced a reluctant world to consider the idea that we were not the only humans to ever walk the earth. It put a name and a face, however strange, to a lost branch of our family tree. For its sheer historical impact, for creating the very category we're talking about, Neanderthal 1 is a powerful contender. It's the cornerstone. But the first discovery isn't always the one that tells you the most. For that, you need more than a skull cap and a few limb bones. You need a skeleton. And in 1908, in a small cave near the village of La Chapelle aux Saints in France, a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton was found. This was a massive discovery. The bones were handed over to a famous and respected French paleontologist, Marcellin Boully. The world was waiting to see what an almost complete Neanderthal looked like. And what Boully gave them was a monster. Boully's reconstruction of the old Man of La Chapelle became the definitive image of a Neanderthal for half a century. He described a creature with a stooped posture, bent knees, and a shuffling walk. The head was thrust forward on a short, thick neck. The big toe was splayed out like an ape's. Boule concluded that Neanderthals were a brutish, dim-witted evolutionary dead end. They were more ape than man, a failed experiment that had nothing to do with our own ancestry. His drawings and descriptions filled textbooks and museum displays. This is where the classic caveman stereotype comes from. The hunched-over, club-dragging brute. It all started with this one skeleton and this one interpretation. The problem is, Boully was wrong. Terribly wrong. The old Man of La Chapelle was, in fact, an old man. He suffered from severe, crippling osteoarthritis. His spine was curved. His joints were degraded. He had lost most of his teeth. Bull, a brilliant anatomist, either missed these clear signs of disease or chose to interpret them as typical Neanderthal traits. He saw what he wanted to see, a primitive creature that made modern humans look superior. His biases shaped his science. It wasn't until the 1950s that two scientists, William Strauss and A.J.E. Cave, re-examined the skeleton. They realized the brutish features were just the ravages of old age and arthritis. They concluded that if you gave a Neanderthal a shave, a haircut, and a suit, he could ride the New York City subway and no one would notice. They were fully upright. Their feet were just like ours. They were not shuffling ape men. So where does that leave the old Man of La Chapelle? Is it the most important fossil? In a way, yes, but its importance is complicated. It's important because it did more to shape the public perception of Neanderthals than any other fossil. And it's important because its re-evaluation tells a crucial story about how science works. Science is not a collection of unchanging facts. It's a process. It makes mistakes. It has biases, and eventually, with new evidence and new perspectives, it corrects itself. The La Chapelle skeleton is maybe the most important fossil for understanding ourselves and how we project our own prejudices onto the past. It's a cautionary tale written in bone, but if the old man was a misinterpretation, what were Neanderthals really like? The next major discovery would challenge the brutish stereotype in a much more profound way. It would give Neanderthals not just an upright posture, but a heart. The story moves to the Zagros Mountains of Iraq in the 1950s. An American archaeologist named Ralph Selecki is excavating a large cave called Shanidar. There, his team unearths the remains of several Neanderthals. One of them, Shanidar 1, was stunning. He was a male, about 40 or 50 years old, an advanced age for the time, and he had lived a very hard life. A crushing blow to the left side of his face had fractured his eye socket, likely blinding him in that eye. His right arm was withered and had been amputated above the elbow long before he died. The bone had healed, but the arm would have been useless. His feet and legs showed signs of fractures and severe arthritis. He would have walked with a painful limp. Selecki and his team looked at this list of injuries and realized something incredible. This man could not have survived on his own. He was severely disabled. He couldn't hunt effectively. He couldn't defend himself well. He would have needed help. Someone had to have fed him, protected him, and cared for him for years, maybe decades. This was a revolutionary idea. The brutish caveman of La Chapelle wouldn't have cared for a disabled member of his group. He would have been left behind. But Shanidar 1 was not left behind. He was part of a community. This skeleton was the first hard evidence for compassion and social support among Neanderthals. It suggested a level of humanity that no one had dared to imagine before. The discoveries at Shanidar Cave didn't stop there. Another skeleton, Shanidar 4, was found buried in soil that contained large amounts of ancient pollen. The pollen came from brightly colored wildflowers. Selecki proposed that this was a flower burial. He imagined the Neanderthals deliberately placing flowers on the grave of their departed companion. It was a beautiful poetic image, a funeral ritual. This suggested not just compassion, but symbolic thought, maybe even a belief in an afterlife. Later research has questioned the flower burial idea. It's possible the pollen was brought into the cave by burrowing rodents. But the evidence from Shanidar 1, the old injured man, remains unshaken. It fundamentally changed our view of Neanderthal society. It transformed them from savage beasts into complex beings who cared for each other. For that reason, many would argue Shanidar 1 is the most important Neanderthal fossil ever found. It didn't just tell us about their bodies, it gave us a glimpse into their souls. It humanized them. But there were still big questions to answer. We now had an idea of their society, but what about their biology? How were they built? And the biggest question of all, could they speak? The debate raged for decades. Did they have language, the thing that seems to make us uniquely human? To answer that, you need very specific bones. In 1983, a team working in Kebara cave in Israel found something remarkable. It was a Neanderthal skeleton, about 60,000 years old. The skeleton, known as Kebara 2, was missing its skull and most of its legs. But it had the most complete torso and pelvis ever found, and in the dirt where the neck would have been, they found one tiny, crucial bone. It was a hyoid bone. The hyoid is a small U-shaped bone that sits in your throat. It's the only bone in the body not connected to any other bone. It's held in place by muscles, and it anchors the tongue. It's a critical piece of the vocal apparatus that allows for the complex movements needed for speech. No one had ever found a Neanderthal hyoid bone before, and when the scientists cleaned this one off, they found it was virtually identical to a modern human hyoid. This was a bombshell. It didn't prove they had language. The shape of the brain and the wiring for language is something bones can't tell us. But it strongly suggested that they had the necessary anatomy for it. They could have produced the same range of sounds that we can. The physical equipment was there. This one tiny bone tipped the scales in a long and bitter debate. The rest of the Kebara 2 skeleton was just as important. The pelvis was wide. The rib cage was enormous and shaped like a barrel, not tapered like ours. This confirmed that Neanderthals were not just a bit different from us. They had a fundamentally different build. They were shorter, stockier, and immensely powerful. Their broad chests housed huge lungs, likely an adaptation for a physically demanding lifestyle in a cold climate. So, is Kebara 2 the most important? If you're an anatomist, the answer is probably yes. It gave us the best look we've ever had at the Neanderthal body plan from the chest down. It settled old arguments about their build, and with that one little hyoid bone, it gave us our strongest clue that Neanderthal voice might have once echoed through those ancient caves, telling stories, giving warnings, or singing a child to sleep. It provided the hard, physical data that other fossils couldn't. All these discoveries, like the first one, the misinterpreted one, the compassionate one, the anatomical one, were building a new picture of the Neanderthals. But the biggest revolution was yet to come. It wouldn't come from the shape of a bone, but from something hidden deep inside it. The final contender for the most important fossil isn't a single individual. It's a group, and the story takes us to a cave in northern Spain called El Sidrón. In 1994, cavers exploring a remote part of the system stumbled upon human remains. Archaeologists eventually recovered over 1,000 bones, belonging to at least 12 different Neanderthals, 3 men, 3 women, 3 adolescents, and 3 younger children. They seemed to be an extended family group, and they had met a violent end. Their bones showed clear marks of butchery. They had been victims of cannibalism. It was a grim story, but the way they died and were buried in a cold, stable cave environment meant their bones were exceptionally well preserved. So well preserved, in fact, that they still contained fragments of DNA. This was the dawn of a new science, paleogenetic. A scientist named Svante Pabo had been pioneering methods to extract and read ancient DNA. It was incredibly difficult work. DNA degrades over time, and ancient samples are easily contaminated by modern DNA from excavators and lab technicians. But the bones from El Sidrón, along with others from Croatia, provided the key material. Over years of painstaking work, Pabo and his team did the impossible. They sequenced the entire Neanderthal genome. They now had the genetic blueprint of a Neanderthal. They could compare it letter by letter with our own. The results, published in 2010, changed everything. They confirmed that Neanderthals and modern humans shared a common ancestor. They also found genes related to cognition, metabolism, and skeletal development that were different. They even identified a gene, FOXP2, which is linked to language and speech in humans. The Neanderthal version was identical to ours, another piece of evidence for their ability to speak. But the biggest revelation was something no one had expected. When they compared the Neanderthal genome to the genomes of people living today, they found a match. People of European and Asian descent have, on average, between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their own genetic code. People of purely African descent have none. The meaning was clear. When modern humans migrated out of Africa tens of thousands of years ago, they met Neanderthals who were already living in Europe and Asia. And they didn't just fight them or replace them, they had children with them. Those children and their descendants carried a little piece of the Neanderthal legacy inside them. That legacy is still there, in billions of people alive today. This discovery completely rewrote the story of our relationship with Neanderthals. They were not an evolutionary dead end. They did not just vanish. They live on, in a small but real way, within us. Their DNA affects our immune systems, our hair, our skin, and our susceptibility to certain diseases. They are part of our story. They are part of us. So, are the bones from El Sidrón the most important? For modern science, it's hard to argue against it. They didn't just give us a single new fact. They gave us a whole new way of asking questions. They opened up a genetic window into the past. They proved that the line between us and them was never a clear one. It was a messy, complicated, and deeply human story of interaction and intermingling. So we come back to the original question. What's the most important Neanderthal fossil ever found? There is no single answer. You can't choose just one. Neanderthal 1, the skullcap from the German Valley, is the most important for historical reasons. They gave them a name and started the entire field of study. It's the original. The old Man of La Chapelle is the most important for understanding our own biases. It created the myth of the brutish caveman and taught us a hard lesson about how science can go wrong and eventually correct itself. In Shanidar 1, the old disabled man from Iraq is the most important for what it tells us about their society. It gave them compassion, it made them human in a way that anatomy alone never could. Kebara 2, with its complete torso and tiny hyoid bone, is the most important for understanding their unique biology. It showed us how they were built and gave us our best evidence that they could speak. And the L. Sidrón fossils are the most important for the modern era. Their DNA changed the game. It proved we interbred and that their legacy is woven into our own genes. Each discovery was a revolution in its own time. The most important fossil depends on the question you ask. Are you asking about history, perception, society, biology, or genetics? The truth is, you need all of them. They are all just pieces of a much larger story. A story about a different kind of humanity that was lost and is only now, piece by piece, being found again. The most important fossil might even be one that is still out there, waiting in a cave, ready to change everything we think we know once more.